All right, folks. So we are starting a new volume, I guess, of our multi-part class at Beth Leda's Online Learning in a series called The Earth is the Lord's, in which we're exploring the intersection of Judaism and the environment. And what motivated me to want to do this, besides, I think environmentalism is an especially pressing concern amidst a changing climate and the like, and I think often Judaism becomes overly parochialized, and we forget the ways in which Torah has everything to say about the world and not just about shul. But what motivated me about this was that it is this year is the Shemitah. This year is the sabbatical year. It's the shevi'it. It's the seventh year in a 7-year cycle, in which the Torah teaches us that, at least in Eretz Yisrael, in the land of Israel, and on this year, starting Rosh Chodesh and then especially kind of culminating in Nisan, we're supposed to allow the land to rest. And we're going to explore what this commandment means. We're going to explore what it means for us. We're going to explore what it means today as well. So just before we get started, I just wanted to ask, before we jump into the texts, when I say Shemitah or shevi'it, what comes to mind for you? Let's do a little bit of free association.
It's that time every 7 years when the land of Israel should be left fallow. And you can just grow anything that's perennial and just take from your own. So that's what I think of it. I also think of, like, when you live in Israel, what a pain it is to try and get fruits and vegetables.
So we're definitely going to do a class about the contemporary applications, looking at what's called the heter mechira, the permission to sell, which allows contemporary Israeli agriculture to survive effectively, and kind of like what went into that decision. So we'll look at the tshuva from Rav Kook and Rav Herzog.
Oh, great.
Like that. But that's going to be down the road. First, we got to get our nuts and bolts in. You got to let me be a little spiritual first. Okay, what else comes to mind? Shemitah. Year of reprieve. Can you? What do you mean when you say that, Susie? Like a fancy word, reprieve. What do you mean by it? Well, as that's being unpacked, we take a break from growing, but also we take a break from payment. Right. So Susie is getting at that there's a twinned nature of Shemitah. One part of it is agronomical, right? It has to do with agricultural labor, and another part of it is also financial or fiduciary. So we let things go. That's actually what literally the word Shemitah means. It means to release. And we're going to see actually where that word Shemitah comes from when we look at the verse. But there's a doubled nature of Shemitah. One part of it is environmental. One part of it is human. Or rather, I think maybe Shemitah recognizes, and this is what sparked the idea for this class. Shemitah recognizes the interconnection between human and the earth. Because the earth the earth does work on its own, but the earth only works with us when we work with the earth. And part of what Shemitah entails is what it means to not work something too hard. And in that way, Shemitah is very much related to Shabbat, right? As we'll see that there's a connection in the verse between Shemitah and Shabbat. We learn halacha about Shabbat from Shemitah. We learn halacha about Shemitah from Shabbat. They are conceptually similar. That's actually going to be the next session of this class, is looking at the interrelationship between Shemitah and between the sabbatical year and the Sabbath. Okay, other Shemitah thoughts, and then we'll get cracking on the texts. As per usual, there are many texts. All right. Well, I had fun preparing it. So yeah. What's that?
It's the seventh year, the seventh.
Mm-hmm.
Just like Sabbath is the seventh day.
Mm-hmm.
It's the seventh year.
That's quite right. So yeah, that's why in the Mishnah it's called shevi'it. It's not called Shemitah, because it is the 7th year. That's right. And there is a cycle of 7. In Judaism, 7 indicates a completion of something. It indicates also the fulfillment of the natural. 7 refers to existence or nature. 8 refers to super nature, right? It's the supernatural. That's why Mila, right? Circumcision happens on the 8th day because it's an intervention into the natural. In the Discworld book series, if you're a Terry Pratchett nerd like me, there's the 8th color of the rainbow called octarine, which is the color of magic. That's not technically Torah, but I don't see it as too far apart from Torah. But yeah, so 8, the Maharal of Prague, the 16th century Kabbalist and rabbi of Prague, Judah Loew of Prague, he wrote a lot about this kind of 7 and then 8, the completion of the natural and then the excess from that, transcending or going beyond the natural. But to Annie's point, Shemitah is 7 in the sense that it brings to a close a cycle in nature. But like Shabbat, it's not tied to anything natural, right? There is no week in nature. There's a month in nature, there's a year in nature, right? We know a year has come when it's the same season as it was a year ago, right? We know a month has gone when the moon disappears. But we don't know a week happens. There's nothing natural that defines a week. A week is given to us by God, and so is Shabbos. So it's the completion of something within nature, but we have to keep track of it. All right, so there are basically 3. The reason this source sheet was so hard to put together is because there are 3 major sections in the Torah in which Shemitah is discussed. And I wanted to at least touch on all of those sections, but they're not short. So I was trying to figure out how to kind of give us a little bit, dip our toe in, and what parts of each to highlight. So let's start with Vayikra, even though we're going to end with actually something we just read, because we actually just saw it in last week's Torah portion in Mishpatim. But let's start with Bahar. So this is Vayikra chapter 25, and it gives us, I think the reason I put this first is I think it gives us a good thematic introduction to what Shemitah is about. So, God says to Moses on the mountain of Sinai, saying, "Speak to the children of Israel, tell them, when you come to the land which I am giving to you, and you dwell in the land, you should have a Sabbath for God." Right? So, like we were saying before, Shemitah is called a Shabbat. It is a Sabbath. And it's interesting, too, it's called a Sabbath for God. It's not called a Sabbath for the land. It's not called a Sabbath for you. It's called a Sabbath for God. And we're going to get at that kind of, let's say, theological dimension soon. Actually, I don't need to be there. Does anyone want to read this, starting with verse 3? Any?
I can do that if you want.
I saw Nancy first.
Oh, go for it.
You're muted.
I see that. Okay. So what I said while I was muted was, when you enter the land, do you want me to start from there?
No, start with verse 3, 6 years. Right.
Verse 3, 6. Okay, yes. That's verse 3.
Oh.
Okay. 6 years you may sow your field, and 6 years you may prune your vineyard and gather in the yield. But in the 7th year, the land shall have a Sabbath of complete rest, a Sabbath of the Lord. You shall not sow your field or prune your vineyard. You shall not reap the aftergrowth of your harvest or gather the grapes of your untrimmed vines. It shall be a year of complete rest for the land. But you may eat whatever the land during its Sabbath will produce. You, your male and female slaves, the hired and bound laborers who live with you, and your cattle and the beasts in your land may eat all its yield.
Great. Okay, so I want to take this section and actually divide it in 2, because there are 2 major things that are accomplished here. One is, before I said that it was a Sabbath for God, but here it says explicitly, right, that in the 7th year it will be a Shabbat Shabbaton, a super Sabbath for the land. And then it says again, a Sabbath for God. So what is missing here, interestingly? What's the element that's missing? In our first classes about environmentalism, I was kind of trying to draw a 3-bound knot. I was tying 3 things together and saying they're inextricable. God, humanity, and the earth, and creation. What's missing in this depiction?
hello?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure, like, I don't want to jump in here, but it seems like it's mentioned God
Good.
and
Shabbat Lashem.
the land,
Good. Shabbat
but
Liel Haaretz.
the creative interacting with the land is the being, the person. And so maybe that's what's missing.
That's exactly right. Shemitah is the removal is the wrong word. The recension, the withdrawal, the retreat of the human being from that relationship. Now, it's not the abandonment of the land, but rather it is the removal, the self-removal, right? The human refrains, or reprieves in Susie's language from before. The human being refrains from working the land. In a way, that's the act of Shemitah. What you do is by not doing. And if you could sense the resonance, and actually literally in the next verses after this, but I didn't include it, when it says, Sheish shanim tizra sadecha, v'sheish shanim tizmor karmecha, v'asavta tfuata. 6 years thou shalt sow your fields, and 6 years you'll prune your vineyards, and you'll gather the produce. That sounds a heck of a lot like Shabbos, right?
Mhm.
And 6 days of the week you're going to work and do all your labors. 6 years you work the land. The 7th year you refrain. You remove yourself from the equation. And then though, and in here it details it in very kind of like Shabbatic kind of way. You're not even allowed to reap the aftergrowth of the harvest. This is, again, I want to train us to be rabbinic thinkers. This is a havamina. Why does the Torah say this? Because you might then say, fine, I'm not allowed to sow the field. I'm not allowed to thresh the grain or whatever. But maybe what I can do then is what? Maybe I can still harvest the sefiach katsircha. I can still like harvest whatever's left over. And the answer is no, because, and we're going to get to the thrust here, why not? Why can't you even reap the aftergrowth of the harvest? That seems like it's okay. I'll put it in this way. I'm going to be very, very yeshiva, right? If Shemitah is the self-removal of the human being from agricultural work, then what's the problem with reaping something that was the product of last year's work? Yeah? That's interesting. Susie's saying because it needs to be left there to serve as like a clover of sorts, a natural fertilizer. Okay, could be. So interesting. We're not supposed to interrupt this functional cycle. We need to let the land have what it needs to recharge. Great. That's a great suggestion. What else? Yeah, Nancy?
Well, again, I have no idea, but in doing that, rather than letting perhaps, some of that plant life just fall and into the earth and regenerate and nourish it, we're interfering. We're doing something.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe that is it. Is like.
But I want to now push back and say, but verse 6 says, but you are allowed to, and not just you, but everyone else,
Right.
is allowed to still eat of the land.
Yeah.
Aha, Susie asked, and that's kind of capturing the point. If you're not supposed to involve yourself with the land, I mean, the obvious answer is why is it you're allowed to eat if you're not allowed to harvest just don't overthink it. What's the obvious answer?
It's working the land?
No, why are you allowed to eat if you can't harvest?
Why can't you eat it? You got to eat something.
Yeah, you gotta eat. A man's gotta eat, right? You gotta eat. I mean, this is before laws or whatever, right? Like they can't go to the store. This is the store. But the difference is, it's the difference between harvesting and, for the lack of a better word, gleaning. On Shabbos, you're not allowed to harvest, you're not allowed to pluck, you're not allowed, etc. Actually, I don't want to say this because I don't want spoilers for the Shabbos class. But you're not allowed to, but it's less of a problem if you were to walk around with your mouth like this, and just like eat off a tree. Why? Because it's an immediate gratification. What you are eating, you are immediately consuming. What you are not doing is saving it for later. Right? The point of Shabbos in some ways is to suspend time. You're never, in a way, positioning yourself to have any kind of advantage for when Shabbos ends, because Shabbos is not supposed to end. And maybe to put it in more brutal economic terms, you're not supposed to be gathering resources so you have an advantage over anyone else who's taking Shabbos more seriously. Shabbos should not be something you take advantage of. Shabbos is something that gives you what you need. So back to Shemitah. You are allowed to eat because you need to eat, but you are not allowed to even harvest what you haven't planted. Fine, you're not supposed to work the land, but maybe to the point is you're not supposed to put the land to work. You're not supposed to enter the land into the market. You're not supposed to, in today's language, monetize the earth. Yeah, Renee.
So you're not, well, I guess I have a question. My question is there a demarcation point, just like you would have for Shabbat, if you light the candles and then that's it? Just like they're saying, you're not even allowed to, reap the aftergrowth. So like
Yes.
there's a demarcation point, like that's it. You can't, now we have started the clock, or the, Shabbat has started. So
Yeah.
like, is there a formal thing that,
Yes.
that would mark the year?
Yes, I would encourage everybody, because I don't know if we're going to get into this in this class, but I would encourage everybody to learn Masechet Shevi'it in the Mishnah, which is, and if you want to get really, really excited, learn Masechet Shevi'it in the Yerushalmi Talmud too, if you want to. We'll be getting into it a little bit, but exactly what the question you're asking is like, what's the how do you do this technically? Right? What are the technical details?
Yeah.
Right? That's an important question.
Yeah.
Right now, we're dealing with theory, not practice, right? First, we're trying to figure out what Shemitah is about. And then we're going to get into how was Shemitah deployed and how has Shemitah evolved. But first, I want us to get what Shemitah trying to do. And this is something that presented itself to me as I was preparing the material, is it's kind of obvious to say, fine, you're not supposed to like be physically intervening in the land, and incursion into the earth, plowing it and reaping and stuff, right? That seems like, oh, obviously you're not supposed to be intervening in the earth's natural way. But even something passive, like harvesting the leftover aftergrowth from last year's planting, even that's not allowed, because it's not just about what you're doing, it's about what is done. It's not just about you working in the earth, on the earth, but rather you're not supposed. I mean, this is what I was saying about the partnership. In all agriculture, and you talk to any farmer, this is the case. You're doing the work, but so is the earth. It's a Shabbos for the earth, not a Shabbos for you. You need to let the land rest, which means even harvesting what's already occurred is not allowed, because by doing that, you're entering the earth into the market. You are gaining some kind of economic advantage through it. What you're only allowed to do is to eat from it. And that creates a certain, a hand-to-mouth environment, which has a certain kind of implication, a certain kind of effect on society, which we're going to get into soon. Yeah, Nancy.
Okay. So I'm missing something, because I can see how you might be able to gather some stuff up that you didn't plant, for perhaps a day or two, but it's a year. So, I mean, I see these people as going hungry, including the cattle and the slaves and the laborers. And like, I don't understand where the food's coming from.
Good. You mean like once the season ends and the...
No, I mean like day 3.
Oh, well, I mean...
Like the whole year.
There's a lot of food
Whole
out
year.
Right. There's a lot of food out there.
Is it siloed?
Right. So that's like the technical issue, right? Is like, obviously it can't be the case that you starve to death. I mean, again, I want us in some ways to suspend our disbelief when we're learning about this, because I want us to try to figure out what the Torah is proposing. Then we can start to figure out, okay, once the rubber hits the road, like how do people make that happen? But first I want to, in a way, discuss what the Torah is imagining.
I get like the non-interfering, not using the earth to for intentionally using it to give you something without whatever. But I can't imagine one could do that without having siloed food like Joseph did.
Uh-huh.
I can't like, 3 days, yeah. But like,
Right. Well, I mean, so 3 days isn't quite right because again, there's a big earth with lots of food in there. And I think that part
but- excuse me, and you're gonna be spending your time nomading around to find the food that you like. Nah.
Yeah, maybe.
Nah, I don't. Nah.
Well, it doesn't matter. Okay, well, again, it's not you. We're not talking about you. We're talking about what is being proposed. And what is being proposed is, you're quite right, a nomadization of society. It is a release of some kinds from what it means to be a property holder. It interrupts and erupts into these basic relations of economic activity. And it means now that there's a certain kind of leveling that's happening. Because now everyone is a gatherer. Everyone now needs to figure out where their food is coming from.
Okay.
What's the shaking head?
Yeah, I'm shaking my head because I get it as a like a lovely concept, a metaphor, but all these people roaming around and nomadic and like with the looking for food, I can see violence happening. I don't see it as like, I get
Right.
it as a nice metaphor.
It's not a metaphor. I want to be very clear. This isn't a metaphor.
Okay.
This
Well, I don't know how this would actually happen.
That's different than a metaphor,
Okay.
right? Let's be technical with our usage. What this
Yeah,
is,
okay.
what this is utopian. But that's different than
But
metaphorical.
it's a whole year
Yes. Okay, again,
that
what
we're in now.
I'm going to intervene here and say, I'm
Yeah.
going to say what we're doing now is we are believing. We are believing this. We are trying to investigate this model, not to critique it. As I told my university classes when I was working as a professor, before we critique, first we understand. We're skipping over at this point what it's trying to say by trying to figure out what it can't say. First, we need to figure out, take it on its own terms, and this is how all discourse has to work. First, you need to understand something on its own terms, then we can start to try to figure out what the implications are. But we're not going to ever learn anything, and I would say in general, unless we open our ears, and we open our...
My ears are open. My
Okay.
ears are open.
We open our minds and try to figure out what an alternative model might look like. So that's what I'm saying. So it involves a certain amount of suspense. I'm not saying you have to believe in it. I'm saying first we just need to learn. Okay? Because I want to first try to figure out what can it teach us. Like, even if, again, I want to say, I'm giving everyone permission to, I'm saying suspend your disbelief, and I want us to kind of go with the fantasy of this. What is this trying to do? That's how I try to see how texts work. What are they trying to do? Like, what's the accomplishment here? What's it trying to do to society by saying this?
You have to have faith in Hashem to go on with this. It shows that you're dependent on God for everything, including your food. And you have to believe that keeping the mitzvah, Shemitah, means you'll be repaid with enough to eat. Somehow, there'll either be enough left over from last year that's already been reaped, or somehow the land will grow enough for you to be able to sustain yourself. But it's all a case of emunah.
Okay, so what this is, what I hear Lauren saying is, again, we're not advocating in a sense, like this is a safe space, you can believe whatever you want here, but the point, what part of what Shemitah is trying to do is through human self-disempowerment, right? By removing our powers, by not intervening, by not working, by not, the word for that in Greek is energia, right? By not expending our energy. It is then creating more space for there to be something else occurring from another source, from God. And that means then it enters us into a certain kind of vulnerable relationship in this threefold knot between us, the earth, and God. When we remove ourselves as being the main actors, then the question is, what are we left with? And we're left with an earth that is allowed to rest, and we're left with our relationship with the Kadosh Baruch Hu. gleaning is a verb, Annie. It just means to take the food that's present on the stalk. So let's look at the implications here. I also want us to note, and we're going to explore this in more depth later, but it says that there will be a Sabbath for the earth for you to eat from it, for your servants, your maidservants, your workers, and your residents, and the temporary residents as well, the immigrants, the refugees, etc., and for the animals, and even the wild animals. And that's a really important point. Every category here includes both that which is domestic and that which is non-domestic. You, your landholding self, but also your employees, your staff. That moves you a circle out in terms of, like prestige, privilege, right? Your the persons living in the place, even the refugees who have come from somewhere else. So now we have people coming in from the outside. Your domesticated animals and the wild animals. So what this is, what Shemitah is, and this is actually a term that's used by ecologists today, is a wilding of the earth. And, to Nancy's point, a wilding of the human. Because it is in some ways undoing social hierarchy. Because those who are secured, right, in their sinecure of land ownership, of being a boss, right, now suddenly are on equal playing field with those who have, as the people who have relied on them for help. Now, again, is it realistic? Maybe not. But if we were to imagine it were to have occurred, what would that do to the landholding psyche? What kind of landholder would you be in the 8th year? Right, having to then experience what it's like to forage and to gather. Grateful, recognizing how contingent everything is, how fragile this whole system is, right? So again, whether it's real or not, the rabbis are clear that this is like maybe not so real, right? Like they say the the Jubilee was never observed. Fine.
Well,
but to the point though is to imagine this occurring, what is it trying to do to us? So let's press on with the rock.
Okay, Josh, one last thing on this.
Yeah,
that's a different thing than the way, for me, than it's being read. Like, oh, this is Shemitah year. This is what we do, rather than release people from debt. This is what we do. And if it's read as, okay, let's look at this. What would this do to you by observing it? Yeah, that I can get.
So Shemitah is the prime example of the ways in which halacha is quite flexible and quite willing to compromise when people's paychecks are on the line. Right? The most famous example of this is Rabbi Akiva's innovation of the prose bool, in which he allows you to maintain a debtor relationship with somebody if you're able to perform this legal loophole. Or with the more recent examples, after the Jewish resettlement in the land of Israel, the allowance to do agriculture and Shemitah, right? So like, Shemitah is the example of how the utopian, the ideal, hits, the rubber of the ideal hits the road of the real. But before we get to the ways in which the real world reduces this or compromises, first I want to understand what's the vision. Okay, I want to understand what the vision is first. Susie says, seems like God wants us to sit back and remember that the land that God created is perfect as it is without our intervention. Okay, so there's a sense of a reorientation of our relationship to the land to reattune to what it is and what its gifts are. I think that's quite right? In terms of what it means to remove ourselves from exploiting the earth through agriculture, agronomy, etc., now, actually, by rewilding the earth, allowing the earth just to kind of exist on its own, and for us, and this, to the point, to forage, to be like animals, to reintegrate ourselves into the biome, right, is a way then to actually see the earth to function on its own terms. Okay, so let's look at this Rashi. Rashi says, it'll be a sabbatical for the earth. Afal pisha asarti malecha. Even though I have forbidden the produce to you in saying you're not allowed to harvest, you're not allowed to thresh, etc., etc., but I haven't forbidden it to you for enjoyment, for benefit or for eating. I.e., and I think this is maybe to the point that Susie was just making, you have a primary relation. Remember, you have to imagine a pre-industrial world. Your primary relationship to the earth has been what you can squeeze out of it, the profit you're able to make from it, right? Your ability to maintain some kind of economic security through it by using it. But Rashi says, Shemitah is a year in which you're not allowed to exploit or to use. The only thing you're allowed to do is to eat and enjoy. And I think that does then, this is what Nancy said before, this does generate now through a kind, again, it has to do through practice. That's why we have to really imagine what this would feel like, what this would be like, by retraining yourself to enjoy the world. That when you come back to it as a landowner, as a farmer, whatever, then would that make you less eager, perhaps, to juice it for all it's worth because you don't want to hurt it anymore? How to it's like couples counseling, but for you and the earth, right? To reappreciate what it is that you gain from it and what it is that you owe to it. Right? Ella shelo tinhog bahem kival habayit. Rashi just says it. Shemitah is the year in which you don't act like an owner of it. A balabus, right? A boss. I mean, it's funny, that's what's a bal habayit, right? But in Yiddish, it's a balabus, right? A balabusta. You don't be a bal haboss. You're not going to be a boss. You're not going to exploit it. You're not going to own it. Rather, you are part of it. Ella hakol you shavimba. Everyone will be equal in it. There is an egalitarianism that is core to Shemitah. You and your servants, and your maidservants, and the refugees are all on an equal playing field. Because you all have fundamentally the same relationship to the earth. You need it. Okay, so let's keep on plugging away. Sforno
Shemitah
also.
is another
Yes.
way.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
yeah,
No,
please.
Shemitah is another way of tzedakah.
Say more.
It sounds like Shemitah. Like Shemitah is like another way of tzedakah because it's justice, and the resources aren't ours. Even if you work and work and work, and you have all that money in your pocket, Hashem is given to you to share it, and yeah, because no one is the owner of the land and the resources more than Hashem.
Great. So this is the idea that the notion that, I mean, this is through the idea of the Jubilee, which I decided actually not to do because I wanted to just focus on the Shemitah, but Gail's quite right, that the notion that we own the land is wrong. We lease the earth, right? We have a 6-year lease on the earth that is renewed every 7 years, right? And it is God that owns the land who has bestowed it to us to use responsibly, but like tzedakah, which the Christian term for tzedakah is charity, but charity comes from the Greek word charitas, which is the same word as grace in English, because what charity is a loving act of generosity, and that's beautiful. It really is. But tzedakah comes from the word justice. Tzedakah comes from the word justice, and justice is because we don't own the money that we have. We don't, and I think this is what I heard Gael saying, we don't own the land. Rather, it is fundamentally a relationship of what we owe to the land. We don't own it, we owe to it. We need it. And just for anyone who was wondering who was this calling, it was Gary Gottlieb. I've been keeping in touch with Gary, even though we haven't had a chance to share shul together, but we've had a number of lovely phone conversations. It's always a treat to get his phone calls. That's a little Bethelita bonus content right there. All right, so, but yeah, so what I got Elle saying is quite right, that Shemitah has a similar, it generates a similar kind of relationship that tzedakah teaches us. That tzedakah is that we don't own the money, we need to disperse the money that is deserved by others, because that's what it means to be in this network. And similarly with Shemitah, we don't own the land, but rather we are responsible to it. Now again, the question I'm trying to ask in a way is, what is Shemitah trying to do to society? What's its end goal in this kind of way? Sforno makes a very beautiful point, and it then is, I think, heightened by what the Ibn Ezra said 300 years before Sforno did, but we're going to do it in the reverse order. Sforno, 16th century Italian Renaissance commentator, I love this Forno's commentary. Here's what he says. It says, Shabbat Lashem. It says it's a Sabbath for God. Why is a Sabbath for God? What's this theological element that's highlighted? Shegam ovdei adama ka'asher yishbetu b'shana hahi yit'oreru lidrosh et Hashem ba'ofen ma. Even
Right.
field workers, while they are resting this year, will have the opportunity, or should, it's in the jussive, right? Should encourage themselves, awaken themselves to seek out God in some kind of way. How do you, what do you take this to mean? How do you understand this this comment that he's making? Yeah, Nancy.
Okay. Well, usually it would be, if you have leisure, you can study. But if you're an agricultural worker, you don't have that leisure. That's the class system.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So if you have leisure, you can study, and
Okay.
that's how it's traditionally been.
One of the theories of the etymology of the word scholar is that it's from the Greek scholies, which means free time.
Mm-hmm.
That a scholar is somebody who, yes, has the leisure time to devote to higher pursuits.
Right.
In contradiction to the grubby, lowly, laboring class who
Right.
toil all day, and then go home, and when the lights, when the sun sets, fall asleep, and they are people condemned in a way to a life of the body and not a life of the mind. Now, is that simplistic? Is that reductive? Obviously, yes. But, point being, actually, and this is what I heard Nancy saying, it is a privilege to be able to study.
Right.
And it's a privilege that only certain people with certain material resources have, because they don't need to work for a living, effectively. But what does Shemitah then guarantee everybody by taking a sabbatical? It means that even the most working class person has a year in which they're able to devote to what they truly love, to learning, to study, and to their religious lives. That, in Shemitah is saying, it is not a privilege to be learning Torah or davening to God, etc. This is a right that every Jew has. And Shemitah makes sure that everybody has at least some time to be able to devote to the introspection, the deeper meditation that Annie is mentioning. It's a very interesting point that he's saying the result of this material leveling is that the people that society hasn't allowed to actualize themselves, like to pursue like Maslow's upper hierarchy of needs, right? Intellectual actualization, religious actualization, to develop time with God, right? They now have a year in which they have the time and the opportunity to do that. Yeah, Gael.
I just want to ask, I just want to add something that is very relevant for this pasuk. It says that according with Rabbi Yitzhak Greenberg, he was saying that one of the main innovations from the Jews after the temple that get destroyed is that we have a technology, and we have a Siddur, and we have Maxorim, and we have books, and all those books keep us attached to the memory. But the second one, it's the democratization. Is that word correct?
Yeah, democratization. Yeah, for sure.
Yes, of the religion.
Mm-hmm.
That means that demo and kratos is like the power of the people. So if each Jew is empowered through the knowledge, and we take very, very deep careful of provoking that space for teaching, we are making Israel alive. But as well, what the main idea or the main goal of being Jewish is making tikkun olam. We don't live pursuing that we create more Jews as the Christians or the Muslims, that they want more than that have peace, or more than other things. They want everybody to believe in their things that they believe. So farther than the dogma, the thing that we want is tikkun olam. So in the case of Shemitah, the other reason is that your body heals, you have the opportunity to have that leisure and learn, but how many things that you can do in 1 year, even fixing your tools if you want to think about it. You're gonna grow.
That's a great point. That's a great point. So I think so. You talked about the question of technology, right? Oh yeah, Nancy, you want to say something before I jump
Yeah,
in?
I do want to say something just to add on to it too. It's the fact that some people who are toiling and then get tired and go to sleep and live to do it again the next day. Having a year to every 7 years to reflect and contemplate actually develops that, because otherwise it's not developed.
Very nicely put.
Yeah, it's not
Right.
developed. Like some people, and some it's developed as you do it, but in other people, like just toiling and going to sleep, I'm so tired. They're not even developing that, and I
Right.
think God's saying that to
So
develop.
yeah, so Gael was talking about like the way in which certain kinds of let's call them media dissemination, mass dissemination technologies, the print, like the books, right, like first manuscript books like that are handwritten, and then the printing press, and now the internet, like all of this. What all this does is it facilitates people having access to sources of knowledge and into tools, right, to mental, spiritual tools, books, sidurim, machzorim, chumashim, etc., etc. But and this is to the point, Shemitah means that not only do we have the tools to be able to do that, but now it sanctions off, it cuts away an entire year in which it is now a universal right for everyone to have the time in which it takes to practice those things, to develop themselves, to devote themselves to these things. Shemitah is in some ways nothing more, nothing less than time. It is a year of interrupting the rat race, or the exploitation of the earth, the exploitation of each other. Because, I mean, to Forno's point too, the reason field workers have this time is because they have a year off. And field workers are obviously the lowest rung in terms of the economic totem pole in an agricultural society. Even the most blue collar worker in the time of the Torah has the right to take a year off, right? This is something when we talk about a sabbatical, who gets to have sabbaticals? Rabbis and professors, right? CEOs, they all get to take the time off so they can pursue and develop themselves, professional development, blah, blah, blah. Who doesn't get to do that? People work at Wendy's, right? People work 3 jobs to make sure that their kids can eat. But Torah says, no, everyone needs to make sure they need to eat this year. And all the rest of your time, you get to pursue what you want to pursue. Namely, you get to develop your higher self. You get to have time with God. Let's look what the Ibn Ezra says. Ibn Ezra, Avraham Ibn Ezra, Spanish, Neoplatonist, rationalist, grammarian, commentator, predating one of the earlier ones we have, late 11th into the early 12th century. Here's what he says. He says, Shabbat Shabbaton, Pirashtiv. I've already explained this. Now, we don't have it doesn't say explicitly, but lucky for you, we have where he explains it. Well, let's look. Where does he explain it? Oh, it's in the very next chapter. Phew, great. Very next chapter it says, Ki vayom hazeh chaper aleichem letaher etchem michol chatoteichem lifnei Hashem titaru. On that day, you will have atonement. You will be purified from all of your sins. You will be purified before God. What day is this?
Yom Kippur.
Chaper aleichem. Yeah, Lauren?
Definitely Yom Kippur.
Yeah, 100% Yom Kippur. It's 100% Yom Kippur. Shabbat, and what is Yom Kippur called? Shabbat Shabbaton. Shabbat Shabbaton hilachem. It is a super Sabbath for you. Lachem v'initem enashoteichem v'chukat olam. Okay, I mean, maybe that's actually to the point of Shemitah too. And you will practice self-denial. That's a nice way of translating that. As a rule of the world. Of the world. Quite interesting. Well, I mean, olam in the Torah means time, not space, but still. You will practice self-denial on Shemitah too, right? I described Shemitah as a time of self-refraining, of self-removal, right, from relations of exploitation, right? We've talked about agricultural exploitation, employing field workers, and even exploiting the very earth itself, right? Turning it into, natural resources. Right? What a disgusting phrase. Human resources. No offense to anyone who works in HR, but what I mean to say is like the notion of reducing human beings to resources or reducing nature to resources, right? It shows what the primary way we're relating to these things, i.e. what we can juice from them. But to the point, Ibn Ezra, in the context of Yom Kippur, defines Shabbat Shabbaton accordingly. He says, Yesh Omrim, Shemitah LaNefesh Vilaguf. Some people say, what does Shabbat Shabbaton mean? To the point, we have to be very clear. He says, Shabbat Shabbaton, I've already explained what this means. I.e., what he means when he says that is everything I'm saying about Yom Kippur, I'm also saying about Shemitah. Usually we say, Shabbat is to Shemitah as Yovel, as Yom Kippur is to Yovel, right? But, and a lot of Kabbalistic hay is made out of that, fine. But Ibn Ezra is saying, no, Yom Kippur, every Shemitah is a Yom Kippur. It's not just Shabbos for you in the earth, it's Yom Kippur for you in the earth. And what does he mean? Some say Shemitah, some say that resting means for your body and for your soul. Beautiful. Okay, and I want to put a pin in that. I want to get back to that. Ve'acherim amru, shehu shvitat hashvita, that it is a resting of the rest. She'ein lamayla mimena, u'shneim shemot pam, yavo ze kodem ze, ve'hem shavim ve'eino rachok. Others say the Shabbat Shabbaton means a rest above that which there is no other rest. It is the greatest rest of all. But I want to actually attend to the language. It literally means shvitata shvita. Even your rest, it rests. It's like a figure of speech, fine. But it's interesting that it's not just that you're resting. And this is what I was getting at before in terms of it's not just about you not doing something. It's about making sure that something occurs. And what's occurring is rest, in a sense, right? You're not even allowed to intervene passively. Right? Shabbat is an interesting example because on Shabbat, we set timers. There's a machlekes between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel. Like, are you allowed to initiate a process that before Shabbos that then extends into Shabbos, right? Can you put a large heavy beam on your olive so that it's pressing olive oil all the way through Shabbos? This is basically the precedent for setting a timer for your lamp. Beit Shammai are uncomfortable with that because they're like, no, it's not that you shouldn't do work. It's that work shouldn't happen. Now, Beit Shammai lose when it comes to Shabbat, but with Shemitah, that is the operating logic of Shemitah. It's not just that you're not doing something; it's that something shouldn't even happen. He says, so here he gets into his grammar point, right? They're both nouns, and sometimes one comes before the other, and this isn't so far-fetched. Fine, but the point he's getting at here, and I want to get back to his ratio. The first point he makes is that. Why is it Shabbat Shabbaton, i.e. why is it what's called kfilut milim, a doubled language? Because it's not repetitive, it's not just emphatic, it's rather distributive. Shabbat for your body and Shabbaton for your soul. So back to Sforno's point. Shemitah is not just about the negative, it's not just about refraining from labor, it is also the positive of what it means to have a year in which you are able to exist in harmony. Right? Shemitah is a year of harmony. It's a year of rest. It's a year of rest in which you take a break from these relationships, these exploitative relationships, which give you short-term benefit but long-term poison you and poison the earth. And by refraining from these things, it allows you then to, much like by slowing down a car, you can turn it. By slowing down your life, you're allowed then to check back in with yourself, tune back in, center yourself in that kind of way, and reconnect with that which is most important. Give your body the break it needs, give your soul the break that it needs, because, I think this is to the point, Shemitah is not just, let's say it's not just taxing for your body to work the land. It's taxing for your soul to have to be on tenterhooks all the time, to have to be trying to make sure that your one harvest is bigger than the other or what have you. there's a rest that your soul needs as well. Okay. A reset. Yes, but not the hashtag Great Reset. We're not getting into any weird conspiracy theories here. But yes, it is a reset. Okay. I'm going to move on now to the next major section of the source sheet. But before I do, is any kind of reflections, any thoughts that anyone wanted to share before we move forward? We're 2 pages in, guys. We're doing great. We only have 6 to go. Well, actually 5. The last one's nothing. Now, this is going to be a 2-weeker. I'm not going to push it. So, what? Any reflections? No pressure. Okay, great. Let's keep on going. There's 2 kinds of Shemitah. Let's do a little bit of Gemurah. All right, we can't not do some Talmud in this class. Who wants to read the Talmudic section?
I can do that if you want.
Please. Wait, Susie. Great. Susie
Go
says.
for it, Susie.
Susie says in the chat, in the chat, she says, farmers rotate their fields so that there is always one unused field, so the land is resting and replenishing. It seems that that is what meant to happen to us and our souls. So right, so this is what's called cyclical farming, in which you rotate through different fields and you leave one in which it's not worked so that it can recharge itself. And similarly, Susie is saying, I think quite rightly, that not only is that allowed to occur with the earth, but it's also even extending to ourselves. We too, our bodies and our souls, are also soil that needs to be replenished in that kind of way. Very, very nicely put. All right. So, maybe I'd like to put a button on it. I think some takeaways from this first section is that there's a number of features that Shemitah has. One is, let's call it a negative feature, a lo ta'aseh, what we're not supposed to do. What we're not doing is we're refraining, we're withdrawing from these exploitative relationships in terms we are relating to the earth as a resource that we are using so that we can profit from it. And we relate to people that we work with or who work for us as part of that kind of resource system. And Shemitah is a time in which we stop doing that to reconnect in a more harmonious, non-exploitative way with the earth, in which we are like an animal, like a forager, like a gatherer, also eating directly from the land, hand to mouth. Again, this is the utopian ideal image, but this is what's being imagined, what's being projected, is that we are returning to the earth in this kind of way. And we are equal to anyone else, even equal to a roaming beast. Right? That we are returning to something primeval, primordial. And then I always want us to be thinking about the 8th year. What does that reprogram our brains to think? Well, when we return to society, when we unwild ourselves, are we going to believe maybe so strongly in what we achieve? Are we going to care so much about our, 401ks or our land holdings or what have you? Or is this going to recontextualize what it means to have these temporary arrangements? Right? To realize that nothing like this is permanent, and also, in a way, nothing of it is real. It returns us to the basic. Why? So that, in a way, we are floating. And then we're able to allow our souls to have space that our hunger was taking up. And even persons who were not granted the privilege or the leisure time to pursue spiritual pursuits, Shemitah is a sabbatical that every single human being gets so they can reconnect with something greater. Okay. So let's look at this Talmud. Lauren.
Okay. Sorry about that. I'm adjusting my glasses. As it is taught in the bright text.
Why don't you do it in the Hebrew? It's not that hard. We can figure it out together, and the English translation is needlessly wordy. So let's look at the Hebrew together.
But it's Aramaic, nachon?
No.
Okay. Detanya, Rabbi Omer, v'zeh dvar hashmita. Shabbat, the font, okay. Shemot bishtei shimotot, hakatuv medaber achat, shmita karka, ve'achat shmita ksafim, bizman she'ata mishameit, Karka ata mishamate. Slicha, my Ivrit wasn't great.
No,
there.
you're fine.
Oh,
It's
there's
Mishameh
more.
Ksafim.
Kasfim bisman she'i ata mishamate. Karkai ata mishamate ksafim.
Perfect. Great. So we're citing a Breita here, right? The Breita says, and this is quoting Rebbe. Rebbe being Rebbe Yehuda Hanasi, the redactor of the Mishnah. Okay? We know he's the big deal of the Mishnah. Why? Because he just goes by Rabbi. He's not even named. It's like Prince. And he is the Prince. Yehuda Hanasi. Judah the Prince. He says, this is the deal with Shemitah. Shamot bishtei shmitot hakatuv medaber. Why is it called Shemitah? Because we are dealing with two different kinds of cancellations. But I don't think cancellation is the right word. It means to let go of something. To withdraw. Okay? To release. Two different kinds of releasing, like the scripture is referring to. One, echat, is releasing the land. And the second is the release of money. When you release the land, you also release the money. And when you don't release the land, you don't release the money. Okay, so what's it saying? Shemitah, we usually think of it as being primarily about what? Primarily about the land.
The land.
Yeah, exactly. Good. But Rebbe is actually saying Shemitah is, and here comes the human element again, Shemitah is equal parts the withdrawal from exploiting the land, and also the withdrawal from creditor-debtor relationships. I.e., this is what we're about to look at, Shemitah is the 7th year of letting the land rest, and it's also the 7th year of one of the ways in which it's equalizing human relationships is that when a debt extends into a 7th year, it is released. Okay? And not only that, but he says that they are strictly speaking parallel to each other. When one is occurring, the other is occurring, and when one's not occurring, the other is not occurring. Okay. So let's look at what that means. So let's look at this. This is a halachic midrash, which is from the Tannaitic period, and it's going to explore how this kind of redounds economically. Quotes a verse that we'll see later. It says, the poor of your people will eat. Hara'ui la'adam la'adam, v'hara'ui la'behema la'behema. That which is fit for a human being to eat, a human being should eat, and that which is fit for an animal to eat, an animal should eat. What kind of relationship to food is that, or to produce is that? What is conditioning the choices that are being made about resource redistribution? Yeah. Yes. Yes, Nancy.
Okay, right. I wasn't sure. So, well, I'm not sure, but making the distinction between an animal and a person, no matter what status the person has, they're still a person. They don't eat what an animal eats.
Good. Meaning
Meaning they're not an animal.
What's in the driver's seat here?
They're meaning like honoring, like that. Well, okay. Let me just not jump to that. Yeah, even if a person is a laborer in the field, acting like a beast, basically, like a beast of burden, they are a person and they're elevated back to that. And they're a human.
Okay, that's interesting. So you're saying there's something ennobling.
Yeah.
In a way. Okay.
Yeah.
I actually want to push back a little bit to say, so in a normal course of let's say, agricultural relations,
Mhm.
what makes the choice is who owns the land. I get to decide what's planted here. I get to decide what's not planted here. Fine, within the bounds of halacha. I can't cross plant seeds. I can't do chardonnays or things like that. But I am allowed to decide what gets planted where, and I am allowed to decide how it's distributed. Not in Shemitah, because in Shemitah it is a relationship of best fit that decides what gets distributed. Food for a person goes for a person, and food that's for an animal goes to the animal. In other words, what's in the driver's seat is what is needed. That's what decides how resources are distributed. And that's different from what I want. This goes back to what I was saying before, what we were talking about before, in terms of the way in which Shemitah returns us to a more basic relationship with the earth, in which what each thing needs is what is provided for. There is a certain Jewish thinker in the 19th century who said, to each according to what they need, from each according to what they can provide. There is something about returning us to what it means to recognize what we need and to also see the way we fit into a symbiotic relationship with the earth. That the earth provides us what we need and not to take more than what we need. This gets actually back to what I was thinking before, which I didn't get to. The other way Shemitah, I think Shemitah refers to a few different things. One is Shabbos, another one is Yom Kippur, like we saw from Ibn Ezra. Also, man. Man also teaches us, manna. It teaches us to only take what we need because God provides exactly what is needed. So is Shemitah. Shemitah returns us to a relation, to relearn what it means to organize our life according to what we need, not according to what we'd prefer. And then it makes sure that everything gets what it needs. Humans get what they need, animals get what they need. And not just that, but u'lesirchircha u'letoshavcha, for your hired workers and your residents. Why does it say both of those things? Because the Midrash says that includes non-Jews. Now that's a very important point, because what we're going to move into now is the way, and this is why I said before, there's two aspects of Shemitah. We're going to start to talk about the economic aspects of Shemitah, which are complicated, and especially as that does with our relationships with Jews and non-Jews. Annie says, these resources can only be distributed for human or animal need if the farmer first plants what it needs to be planted, not what the farmer or their spouse or partner may want to plant. It takes a lot of planning to plant the right food so they do maximize a successful crop. That's true. I think that is true. It does not deny or remove the way in which good agricultural planning can increase yield. That is true. But also the earth works on its own in the Shemitah, right? It's not just the leftovers, because sometimes farmers are planting annual crops, right? Not perennial crops. So some of it is also, again, the rewilding of the earth away from the way in which human intervention has organized it. All right, but here's something I want to get to. Shemitah, we gestured to this before. Shemitah both attends to those who are within the bounds and also breaks down the boundaries. Shemitah is about making sure they get what they need, but then also the way in which humans and animals in some way are on the same level. We get what we need and they get what we need. Animals live according to what they need. So are humans now. And it's not just people in your household who you hire, but also even outside of the Jewish community. Still, non-Jews are also going to be provided for in this kind of way. Now that's not going to be so simple, which is what we're going to explore next. But last but not least, Hagerim imacha. That includes the achsania. That includes even guests, right? Even people who are staying with you temporarily. People staying in a B&B. People staying, the ancient Near Eastern society was based in hospitality, right? If you are traveling around and you don't have anywhere to stay, who's going to take care of you? Then you are in deep, deep trouble. So here's actually, I think, where maybe is a good place for us to stop for this week, and we are kind of left with a good cliffhanger for next week. But let's wrap this up. The reason I wanted to end on this text from Sifra is because Shemitah is teaching us something about what it means to narrow in, and also what it means to expand broadly. What do I mean? I mean that Shemitah is teaching us how to, I think, reduce life to something simple, for lack of a better term, something pure, something basic, but basic in the way that you reduce a sauce down to its essence, right? To being like a consomme or whatever, right? The way in which it's concentrated flavor. Shemitah is returning our lives to its most basic components. Why? So that we have now better perspective on all of this all the things that we've added on top of it. And also by recontextualizing those things, we come to realize that those aren't natural. Those are choices that have been made. Choices which God has let us make, but choices which also can never be made without that kind of knowledge, that kind of awareness of how contingent all of these things are. But it's also broadening us because it forces us to recontextualize our lives within the broader world, the broader environment, to see us not as so different from wild creatures, from laborers, from the poor. We are all leveled out. We're all on the same playing field. And not just that, but even when it comes to intercommunal relationships between us and non-Jews, it is essential that we are all, it really returns us to what it means to be a human being as a creature on the land. In a way, it pre-Jews us in some ways. Now, it re-Jews us in another way, which is what we're going to look at next week in terms of these creditor and debtor relationships, these relationships between people who are taking out loans. And there we do have a difference. But, point being, we have broadened our perspective, and we have broadened what it means to, I think, understand what our existential position on this earth. Now, I don't want to just close in my final thoughts. I saw a comment in the chat, and we can have a little bit of conversation before we wrap up. Yeah. Susie asks, should it be a differentiation between commercial farming and a kitchen garden, whereas there's no such thing as growing food for yourself historically? Yeah. In the ancient world, there is no such thing as a kitchen garden because everything is about need, effectively. Maybe not everybody is working, to sell food or something like that, but everyone is subsistence farming, effectively. It's a subsistence economy, right? There is very little surplus in the ancient world, and what there is then channeled back into, which is why, actually, it's really important to kind of remember that when you learn the laws of Shabbat. The laws of Shabbat, a lot of it are about not upcycling, right, or about not recycling. It's about not reusing everything like you would normally, right? It's like, oh, I break open a bottle so I can drink wine. Fine, but you're not allowed then to use the broken shard of bottle to, serve as like a mud scraper, in the bath or what have you. Why? Because then you created a tool. Shabbat recognizes how fundamentally creative human life is. And Shemitah, too, is trying to, again, give us a break from the labor of creativity because it recognizes that all creativity also involves in some way exploitation. Now, again, it's utopian. It is 1 year, and it's also a year that involves lots of compromise in the history of halakha. That's true. But again, these first 2 weeks, what we're really just trying to learn is, what is Shemitah trying to teach us? A Torah that maybe is hard to accept. That what it means to live on this earth is always to be living with compromise. And Shemitah is trying to give us a year of a dream. The dream of a year of harmony, of no tension, of gliding through the world, of eating what you need, and moving on. Now, again, it's utopian, it's messianic, but it is, in a way, it's the me'eno olam haba, like Shabbat. It's a taste of the world to come in this world, because it maybe returns us to Garden of Eden, in a way, a time before work, or a time before exploitation. Okay, so maybe final thoughts, and then again exciting cliffhanger for next week. Yeah, Gael.
Oh, I usually go by Nissim. So
okay, sorry,
no, it's
Nissim.
fine.
Apologize.
I have a question. Maybe I'm not asking for a response right now,
Mhm.
because I know it's a huge topic, but it's just a question and idea for maybe next class. Okay, so if I leave my land free, and imagine I start having bats and owls and snakes and a lot of creatures that could be a little risk for me, but of course I will maybe be in the need or go through the point that I need to choose if I'm gonna take them out again from my land when I start working again with my farm, or of course I can choose to just leave them there. Um, so there's a like commentaries in the Talmud or some discussions about this specific point, and I'm inspired in this question because of my experience in farms, but as well in a movie that I highly recommend to all of you, that it's called My Little Big Farm. So they try to
If you want
create
to
like
put in, if you want to put in the chat like a link to it, so people can check it out later.
yes, it's on Netflix. It's yeah, of course I will try to do it. It's
Mhm.
called My Little Big Farm, and it's a story about a couple that they sell their apartment here in like in the city, and they move to a farm, and they create the land, letting the species and grass and other things that usually in the commercial farm they can have. And it's very interesting because it take exactly 7 years to be fully sustainable. They have a lake and they have certain species, and they also by themselves bring certain animals or take away others. It was very interesting. So
Mhm.
that's why I'm asking, because the
Um,
Shemitah it's gonna bring these animals back to my land.
mhm.
So I'm
Mhm.
gonna
You mean
undo the
potentially?
work.
You mean potentially harmful animals?
Well, if you have an owl, of course, because if you have a baby, you have a cat like that brings you services as well, because it's gonna control the plea, or they are gonna be
Right.
tempted to eat my chicken, you know,
Right. Yeah.
like
So I
there's
think I
certain
think I think
animals.
next week we're. I mean, and this is to I think both your question, Nisim, and also Nancy's question, is that I think next week we're going to start to look more at the nitty gritty of things in terms of how it worked, and that also has to do with, if what we're talking about is returning us to a more basic economic system of kind of gathering effectively, then how are we then distributing our spare resources? How are we then making sure that things get what we need? And also then, like, okay, if we're not supposed to be intervening in agricultural ways, then is there some way we're allowed to do upkeep and the like? I think that's a very good question, and I think again, like, it kind of opens up the larger question of the way in which this ideal system of Shemitah and Yovel end up being kind of more domesticated and made more manageable. But I would say, though, that I think maybe what we're talking about, and this is about Shabbat too, is that what it means to commit to rest means to commit to inefficiency. Because what it's doing is we're dethroning efficiency as the main thing that we're always serving. Right? In a way, Shabbat and maybe even Shemitah should be the only time we're ever inefficient. Because the point isn't about, again, constantly exploiting something, but the way we show something's valuable is because we're actually removing ourselves from an economically driven existential standpoint. We're not always trying to think about how we're able to be gaining from something or to make ourselves more secure. It's going to mean then that when we pick up the next day, Sunday morning, right, or the eighth, the first year of the next Shemitah cycle, it means we need to restart. But again, I think there's something, just as Shemitah is important, so is the eighth year. The eighth year is important too because you're taking with you what you've learned, and you've taken with you what it means to start again. Hopefully, from the wisdom that you've gained, through your learning, as everyone now has the right to do and the time to do, and also I think reflecting as well. Shabbat for the soul, as Ibn Ezra put it. It's a great question, Nisim, and put the documentary in the chat if you can find it, so people can check it out. And it's very interesting. That's 7 years. Again, 7 as this completion of a natural cycle. That's quite telling. Oh, fantastic. Okay, it's on YouTube link if anyone wants to copy that before I end our meeting. Thank you so much, everybody, for such a great class. We got through almost half of the source sheet, but I believe we can finish it next week. Then after that, this Thursday we have a Parsha chat about Parshat Truma. Is this going to be a normal Joshi Parsha chat? Renee is not able to do the challah make this week, but we'll be able to do a special Adar themed challah make for Adar Sheni in just under a month. So get ready for that. A good Chodesh, or Chodesh Tov to everybody. Happy Adar Rishon. It's the leap year. It's the Shemitah year. It's a very exciting time. Mishu nichnas adar marbin v'simcha. So I hope everyone starts to find something joyous and give it to yourself because you deserve it. So next week we'll finish the source sheet for Shemitah. The week after that we'll do a special class on Purim Katan, or as I call it, Lil Purim, which is my favorite holiday. One of my favorite holidays. They're all my favorite holidays, but it's a very interesting time because it is. And it says something very interesting about halakha too. Actually, it's a very interesting meta halachic class. And then after Lil Purim, we'll have another couple weeks on Shemitah, and then we'll start learning about Purim and Pesach and the like. So thank you so much for joining. Tell your friends, and big yasher koach for all your wonderful thoughts and questions and challenges. And I'm excited to continue learning and discussing this with you next week. Shavua tov, everybody.